Hey, folks, it's Panthers beat reporter Mike Kaye here with fellow Panthers beat reporter Alex Zietlow, and this is the Processing Blue podcast. And for once, we are coming off a game where they actually were a bunch of process blue. And so the bit of the show title kind of works.
Well, I think we did that. I think I think Dave did that. Dave Canales did that because he knew that our podcast needed the branding help. Not that we need the help necessarily, but he was just like, hey, I really support you guys.
That's like a really nice thought. How thoughtful.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
To be thinking that he is that thoughtful. You know what I mean? Like there's like layers to that onion there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dave is a very thoughtful person. And I almost called him Mike just now. And I thought, and if that were the case, then you would have the power to choose the Panthers uniforms every week. Anyway, let's get it going, Mike. I'm already screwing this up.
On that note, okay, so the Panthers are coming off a 38-20 loss to the Atlanta Falcons. They have now lost 3 games in a row. They lead the league, or they have the largest point differential in the entire league right now. They're also giving up the most points on defense by like a country mile. Like it's not even close. They're giving up 33.8 points per game. The next closest is the Jaguars, I should say. And they're only giving relatively less, 29.7 points per game. So that's a full 4.1 points ahead of the next worst defense from a point differential standpoint. They're also terrible in a bunch of other categories, but we won't belabor that. Let's talk about this game a little bit. My mood was greatly affected by this game because Alex was pulled to do NASCAR duty at the time he's caught up. But Jen, like, to give you a behind the scenes thing, Alex is normally like I try out jokes on him and he kind of tells me where I want to go with them. You know, he'll tell me if it's funny by laughing like that. And so it really affected my mood. Also, just a fun fact, 425 starts are the worst for beat writers.
Oh, gosh.
The interest isn't there after games. And then I didn't get home till 11 o'clock. So it felt all for naught. You know what I mean? Like it was just like, it was tough. But anyway, we called each other on the drive home. It was very cute. I'll just say that.
Yeah, Mike, I was just like, man, Mike, I miss you today. And Mike was like, hey, I missed you too. That's why I'm calling you. You gave me a lot to look forward to though this weekend when I'm up in Washington for the Commanders game. That's also a 4:05 start. I guess 4:25 was this past week, and this is 4:05. But yeah, man, I have a lot of duties when I'm in the press box. Among them, I am the focus group for Mike Kaye's jokes. And let's be clear, Mike is among the most entertaining in the press box. And it's an important role that he fills. And because it's an important role for him, it's an important role for me too. So
yeah, and with you, sideswiping your duties, the Panthers defense continued to play like duty.
Look at that segue and that pun. You guys think that he just comes up with them, but nah, this is some hard work that he puts on and some talent. Anyway, go on, Mike.
Anyway, this defense couldn't tackle a tackle dummy. Like this is getting really bad. Pro Football Focus had them missing 13 tackles in the game. I believe it was 11 against the run. That's rough. Following the game, if you subscribe to our Access Panthers newsletter, it's awesome. If you don't, you should sign up. But, I went up to Shy Tuttle, who's the nose tackle that they signed last year. He's from the area. They brought him in to stop the run, and that's precisely what he said. But he was so somber, and he just said, they brought me here to play the run. I need to play the run better. A lot of accountability in that locker room. This offense and special teams, the offense and special teams have no margin for error. Like Andy Dalton kept them in the game until the fourth quarter, and then he made one of the worst decisions ever with the he could have possibly made. Right. A well-covered Ian Thomas was basically jumped. His route was jumped by AJ Terrell, who's one of the best corners in the league. for an interception. That was a backbreaker. At that point, it was 28-20. It felt like the Panthers had all the momentum, and it just kind of fell by the wayside. This Panthers defense is just not getting better. And I'm sorry to speak in general terms. Alex caught up here, but like this felt like a game that nobody's going to remember, specifically because it's felt like a lot of other games before. They all kind of blur together.
Yeah.
This team is losing by 16.7 points a game. And that's crazy because they had a blowout win on the road.
Right.
And that's even, I thought Andy Dalton played relatively well. I mean, he had those 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter. The last one was kind of like a meaningless one because all he was trying to do was move the ball down the field. The game was out of hand. But, I just think as our colleague and columnist Scott Fowler said, this team isn't going to get better until the defense is fixed. And listen, I've wrote about this before. They had to double down on the offense because of how much they put into Bryce Young. So when they decided to bench Bryce Young, it magnifies how little they did to improve the defense after they lost Frankie Louvu and Brian Burns and Von Bell and
Jeremy Chin,
who you'll see this weekend. But I think, they didn't expect to lose Shaq Thompson right away. They didn't expect to lose Derek Brown. We already knew they had a paper-thin defense. It's just it's J.C. Horn, Trevin Wallace, and a bunch of other guys out there right now. And unfortunately, they are going to step into Landover, Maryland this weekend and face a team that is playing extremely well on offense, has a rookie quarterback who is everything they hoped Bryce Young could be when they drafted him first overall. And it makes you think, what if they didn't trade up for Bryce Young, stuck with Sam Darnold, who is having a pretty great year last year under Frank Reich. He did fit the Frank Reich QB profile. And then if they bombed, then you draft either Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams, who lit them up 2 weeks ago.
Right. And then, of course, if you keep Matt Corral, what happens and what if you don't make that blockbuster trade in April with the Bears? I mean, the list of these hypotheticals are haunting, yes, and I guess they are worth talking about because they're compelling, but I don't know if the average Panthers fan can take that heartache when talking about these hypotheticals. Anyway, moving on to the Washington Commanders, Mike.
Yeah, so typically Mondays in Charlotte are for really bad injury updates, and this past Monday, that changed a little bit. Alex, do you want to get into kind of who's on the cusp of returning and hopefully making this team not just watchable, but competitive?
Yeah. Because that's really the thing that is worth talking about at this point. So Dave Canales gave an update on a whole bunch of guys. Mike, if I miss a couple, just feel free to hop in. The big one that I think a lot of people are paying attention to, and a lot of people at least are asking me about just via text or whatever, is running back Jonathan Brooks. He started the year on the non-football injury list after sustaining an ACL tear at the latter part of his final year at Texas. He gets drafted, and he was drafted in the second round, first running back off the board, has obviously immense talent, has fantastic size. And we were told once he got drafted, hey, he's going to be ready by training camp. Training camp comes. He's going to be ready by the season. The season comes. The timelines kept shifting. They put him on the non-football injury list to begin the season, which means he was going to miss the first 4 games no matter what. And now Dave Canales has sort of indicated that his 21-day window of practice is going to be open soon. And precisely what that means is he is still on the reserve, the injured reserve, essentially. He has not been activated to the 53-man roster. But the idea is that he is in the final phases of before he can go and experience a full practice. And that's really important because it's not necessarily important when it comes to Panthers production right now, because the running backs are actually doing a great job from a production standpoint. But when it comes to seeing someone who they drafted this past draft and seeing a rookie and like figuring out if he's NFL ready, that's super important. It's also super important to a whole bunch of fantasy people out there who listen to mainstream national dudes. I just said mainstream media, national media, and not us, who've been saying from the beginning of the season that he won't play the majority of the season because of this injury. This is something we've said from day one. Anyway, any extra thoughts on Jonathan Brooks? I feel like it's worth spending a little bit of time on him since he's the guy.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind. So Canales said that they needed to make a decision like around Monday, which doesn't mean that they were going to activate him Monday or even Tuesday. They could activate him to practice on Wednesday, and that way it gives them extra time because it is a 21-day window. A lot of people talk about it being 3 weeks, but if you activate him to practice on Wednesday, you have until the Tuesday of 4 weeks later, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect them to take the full time that they need here. There is no reason to rush him back. Absolutely no reason. Here's the thing. He's the future.
Yep.
We've said it a million times. Chuba Hubbard is on a contract year. He has every reason to want every touch possible. They have every reason to use him to their heart's content. That's just smart business with the running back position. And I think he's rewarding them with how he's played. I mean, really, the offensive line, the running, and Chuba Hubbard are what this team is hanging their hat on right now, or helmet, if you want to say. And so I think Jonathan Brooks, they will take their time. They want to make sure that he is good to go, because when the time comes to let him loose, well, they're gonna let him loose. And I think there's been this sentiment that like once he's back, he'll be the starting running back. I don't see that. I think he's got very much a Devonta Freeman style role coming out of this ACL injury. I think he's going to be more of what you've seen Miles Sanders do. They've been very specific in using a two-back system. I mean, really, Raheem Blackshear has not gotten a touch. And I think that's what you'll see. They've been trying to do the 21 personnel thing to kind of get Miles Sanders on the field. I think they'd probably like to get Brooks out there before the trade deadline, just in case there's a running back injury somewhere else, and maybe they can get a late round pick for Miles Sanders. We'll talk about the trade deadline and trades a little bit later. But I think that's something to keep in mind. Who else you got injury-wise?
Yeah, okay. Moving on from Jonathan Brooks, cornerback Dane Jackson is someone who I think it's pretty much written on the wall that he's going to be activated to the 53-man roster this week. He, too, started the season on the injured reserve list with a hamstring injury. And he was this guy that the Panthers brought in to be the starting cornerback opposite J.C. Horn. And he hasn't played a snap yet this year. His 21-day practice window, as Mike mentioned when talking about Brooks, his 21-day practice window opened essentially 2 weeks ago. And so correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. He does not have to play this week.
Correct.
But he has to be activated by Monday of next week in order for the Panthers not to lose him for the season.
I believe it's Tuesday.
Okay.
But either way, they still, like, if Saturday comes around and he can't play, they're fine for another couple of days. To this point, Mike Jackson, his replacement, has played 100% of the snaps. So it's not like he's dealing with durability issues. What I think they'd love for Dane Jackson to be able to do is play the nickel position, where Troy Hill has really struggled, especially in the run game as of late. And so I think that that's kind of more of what you're looking at. I think Mike Jackson's done a relatively good job on the outside. And obviously J.C. Horn's out there. But I think from their perspective, again, I don't think there's a need to rush guys back unless you really need them. And so I think, while the cornerback play hasn't been terrific, I do think Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn have played well enough that you feel good about it.
Yeah. Dane, and for what it's worth, Canales has said that Dane has looked really good in practice the last 2 weeks.
Sure.
Every single Friday when we get the final injury report, he's been questionable, and on Saturday he's been downgraded to out. Okay, let's quickly go through the next
speed
couple.
round this one. Speed round.
Yep. Safety Sam Franklin. As you know, the charismatic Sam Franklin, he was voted a captain, even though he started the season on the injured reserve list with a broken foot. He has been cleared to practice this week, so that's good news for the Panthers. Another guy, offensive tackle Taylor Moton. His amazing streak as this durable tackle for the Panthers had to end last week because of a triceps injury, but he is now day-to-day, according to Canales. And so we will be monitoring that for this upcoming week. And then also day-to-day is outside linebacker Jadeveon Clowney. He was doubtful going into the game last week, and now he is day-to-day. It is interesting about Clowney because when we saw him after the game, what was it? The Chicago game, he was like, no, he like kind of intimated that he'll be okay. But I guess with shoulder injuries, you never know. So it would be really good if the Panthers could get Clowney back. He was one of the few guys, as I'm sure you would say, one of the few guys who set the edge well, one of the few guys who defended the run pretty well on his side of the ball. He got to the quarterback a couple times. Yeah, like they were badly missing Clowney against the Falcons, at least from what I could see.
Yeah, and coming out of that, we're talking about veterans, we're talking about guys with injuries and all that stuff. I've been asked quite a bit in the mailbag, and I do address it in Wednesday's mailbag. So if you're in the mood to read something, we address the quarterback. But yeah, you always are. But hopefully you can hear my 1-year-old screaming in the background.
Hopefully I can, to be honest. I wish.
Well, no, he's going through some. I don't know what his deal is, but my wife's got him. Anyway,
girl troubles.
Probably.
Girl
you know him. But so I've been asked this a lot. Like, at what point do you go back to Bryce Young? Mm-hmm. And so, yes, they're on a 3-game losing streak. Yes, Andy Dalton's kind of cooled off a little bit. And as you can see in the mailbag, I won't list off numbers like a robot, but like almost every statistical category in average for both Dalton, the team, for not only Dalton, but the team, the offense, and basically every playmaker is up with Dalton over Bryce Young. Like every category. And so I think, we talked about this on the podcast when he was promoted. And I said it's hard to redeem this season from a long-term developmental standpoint. But I think what we've seen and what's been proven wrong about that is there is some long-term logic there. Because if you look at the way that Xavier Legette has played, if you look at the way that Chuba Hubbard has played and his carries and touches, if you look at Jalen Coker, if you look at guys like that, younger players stepping up, as well as the offensive line, by the way, everything has improved with Andy Dalton there. So it makes it easier to evaluate. They also have a string of games before the bye week where you look at, yes, Washington has been very good, but they don't look unbeatable. It's also a short trip. Denver has gotten mixed results from Bo Nix. They've played kind of up and down. You've got the Saints who've kind of been figured out since week 1, since they lost to the Eagles at home. Everybody's seemingly copying that approach against their offense. Then you've got the Giants in Germany, and then you have the bye. The Giants are averaging 16 points a game. So, like, if you want to get a couple of wins while you still can and not be embarrassed potentially in Germany, maybe you stick with Andy Dalton through that. That pushes you beyond the trade deadline. There's no more trade speculation. And then you give the last 7 or so games to Bryce Young to kind of boost his stock both internally and externally. And then maybe you make a decision from there. To me, once you made the decision to bench Bryce, this no longer became all about the quarterback. It became all about everybody else.
Right.
That was like the key fork in the road, right? Because we came into the season thinking this was all about Bryce Young. And the second you say it's not, well, then it becomes about everybody else. It's very hard to go back to that. But following the bye, you've given him several weeks now to learn behind a veteran, to kind of reset. The trade deadline is come and gone. And then you're saying, like, look, kid, we didn't trade you. Go do what you need to do, prove yourself, and maybe you are a starter in the league next year. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting proposition. I'm still play Andy the rest of the year. I mean, dude, I really hate to. It's a difficult position. It's a decision that I wish I didn't have to make, and thank goodness I don't have to make it. It's a very unenviable position because you got a whole bunch of decision makers outside of Dan Morgan a little bit because he was in that decision room, and the owner David Tepper, who said, "Okay, we really want Bryce" a year ago. Outside of that, Dave came in really like he was really excited about the dazzling traits that Alabama Bryce had, the creativity, the processing ability, all those things. But he wasn't the guy who drafted him. Brant Tillis, the another guy, really important guy in the front office, he didn't draft Bryce Young either. And so it's a very difficult and I imagine very delicate situation right now. I'm sticking with I don't see how this team could be. I think you stick with Andy, and I don't. And the reason why I do that is because you continue to see the progress that all these other players are making, and
Sure.
that is worth something. I'm
I'm
having trouble articulating it, but that is worth something, and I think that if you want to try with Bryce Young again, I think. But then again, if you want to try Bryce Young again at the start of next year, if that's your plan, and he
You can't do
isn't
that. He cannot play
right,
next year if he does not return to the lineup this
yeah,
year.
I mean, I'm
You can't do
processing this in the moment, man. So like, you can't start over again next year. I mean,
Well,
so I
that's
guess
the whole point, right? Like
right, yeah,
once wins don't matter and you've gotten this collection of, hey, these guys are actually relatively good,
yeah,
then do you that's kind of my thought process is it's like a complete reset. I do think losing with a 36-year-old quarterback is like a tough pill to swallow. Then you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, what can work at quarterback in this
right,
offense? And
yeah,
so I think that's part of it. But we brought up the trade deadline. I kind of want to get into this a little bit because I've also been asked a lot about, trading guys. On Tuesday when we're recording this podcast, the Jets acquired Davante Adams for a conditional third-round pick from the Las Vegas Raiders. And then the Bills quickly swung a deal for Amari Cooper. They traded a third-round pick and a seventh-round pick for Cooper and a sixth-round pick. I thought that was actually a really great deal for both sides because in trades, winning it looks different from everybody else.
yep.
I won't spend time kind of going into that, but if you want to check my Twitter, I kind of explain why I think both sides really worked out well there. I've been asked about trades. I'll go down the list and kind of talk about who I think makes sense. I don't think Chuba Hubbard is going anywhere. I don't think it makes sense to do that. He is literally the one position player sitting in the way of Dave Canales looking like Frank Reich, in my opinion. He is
Not
playing,
Deontay Johnson.
he's playing well, but I think when you look, I mean, so did Adam Thielen last year.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And that's not an insult to Dave. What I'm saying is Chuba Hubbard is the proven, the tried and true. The second they got a competent quarterback in there, he's produced 407 yards in the last 4 games.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
I mean, he is like playing at a Pro Bowl level. He might be the team's only Pro Bowler outside of maybe Robert Hunt. The offensive line has played well. I'm just saying from like a playmaker standpoint, he has been the go-to. He's been what stirred the drink. Now they're 1-3 in that phase. So you could say to yourself, well, maybe it's not worth it. But he's also in the final year of his contract. And it's important to remember that Christian McCaffrey's trade was unicorn-like because he is so dynamic. He's an all-pro. He's this guy that can do a ton of different things. He's getting traded to the perfect offense.
Mm-hmm.
But we go back, Jay Ajayi was traded from the Dolphins to the Eagles after a Pro Bowl season. In the middle of the 2017 season, he was traded for a 4th-round pick. Since then, he was coming off a Pro Bowl season. Cuba's never made a Pro Bowl. Since then, the league's outlook on running backs has been devalued. So he's on the final year of his deal. You would need like a massive injury to make that even probably a 5th-round pick at this point. I don't think that that's worth it, especially because if he goes and signs somewhere else, you're going to get a compensation pick most likely if you're not spending willy-nilly. And really, their cap situation next year isn't terrific. So he might bring you a compensatory pick. Hey, you might want to re-sign him because most good running back rooms have 2 starter caliber running backs if they can manage it. I also don't think he's going to be paid top of level market. Another guy that's constantly brought up is Adam Thielen. He has a lot in his contract next year. He's got a base salary of $4 million. And then he has like another $2.75 million in potential bonuses. I don't think trading for him really helps you. He's very position specific. As much as he's played Z this year, I think he's really a slot receiver in most offenses. He's also in his mid-30s. I kind of just don't see it. If it was going to happen, it would have happened this past offseason. Another guy that I kind of don't see, like people have brought up JC Horn. I just don't see what the benefit is. He's now played as many games this year as he did last year. He's staying healthy, knock on wood. I just don't see the return rate on that one. Some guys that I do think make sense, Jadeveon Clowney, who you mentioned. I know you would be heartbroken, but
I would cry.
I think now's the time.
For the bit.
Pass rushers are at a premium. He's older. This defense just doesn't work with him or without him. I think, if you could snag a 4th or 5th-round pick for him, I think you feel pretty good about it. You have him on a 2-year deal, and I don't know if he's going to age right into this rebuild. Yeah. They had to do something. I think it's mostly been a failed signing, to be honest with you. I don't think it's worked out all that well. As good as he's been, that's not an insult to him. I just think the ecosystem hasn't matched what he is capable of doing. Kind of felt that way at the time. They had to do something. Miles Sanders, if there's like a major injury and you can tie a pick with him and you can do a pick swap of like a 6th and 7th, that opens up some salary cap space. They only have $1.47 million in cap space right now. They have the worst cap situation this season right now. They even had to restructure DJ Wadham, who hasn't played a game yet, per game bonuses in order to get under the cap recently. Another guy who could make sense is Xavier Woods. He's in the final year of his deal, but safeties tend to be those type of position players that get moved during the middle of the season. Wouldn't be shocked with that one. And then lastly, Jonathan Mingo. So we saw this past week that Jalen Coker outsnapped Jonathan Mingo. 21 games into his career, I have no idea what he is. He was terrific during training camp, but so was Bryce Young. And they were going up against a defense that was about as efficient as a shopping bag with holes in it. So, I just don't know.
I'm sure you wrote that in your mailbag.
No, I actually have another analogy in there. You should tune. It's actually, I think it's better. So I just saved it for the print. You got to pride in product.
Let's go, yeah.
And Zach, who we haven't mentioned yet, I'm sure I can't see him, but I'm sure he wants me to speed this up. Jonathan Mingo makes sense for a few reasons. One, he is still only, I believe, 23 years old. He's had some moments. I just don't know what it's going to be here. Xavier Legette has proven to be so much more dynamic than him. I understand Deontay Johnson's in the final year of his deal. I don't see him being traded either way. I think they would listen, but I just again, he's in the final year of his deal, and he just got swapped for a late round pick swap, and Dante Jackson, who was knowingly going to be cut. So I don't know how he would up his value that much, especially when he's only had the success in the past 4 games with Andy Dalton. I just don't know where Mingo fits. And it does kind of seem like, we talked about with Bryce Young, Dave didn't draft him. Brent Tillis didn't draft him. I thought that Mingo was more of a 3rd or 4th round pick. I think he's showing that he probably should have been a 4th round pick. There's just like, he doesn't play to his size. His speed is very inconsistent. I think his concentration issues have been a problem. I really thought he turned a corner in training camp, but I could see another team saying, I love this guy's draft pedigree. I love his size. Let's see if we can make this work. And maybe you get a 5th round pick for him. I do think the Panthers need to add picks. I do think they need to cushion some of their salary cap. I don't expect them to be super busy at the trade deadline based on my conversations, but I do think they will be, if they are active, they will be sellers.
Okay, Mike, real quick. And I'm not necessarily I'll play devil's advocate here, but I largely agree with you, as I do most things.
Waterloo.
What if Jonathan Mingo provides? What if what he does when it comes to taking off the top?
What does he do well?
Okay. Takes off the top of. He literally takes off the top of defenses pretty well. There have been a couple times this season where I'm just like watching film after the game, and the defense and multiple defenders go toward Mingo, and that opens up a lane for Xavier Legette or opens up something for Adam Thielen early on. Like that has happened. That's legit. He's big enough to do some really good blocking. On when I know the Panthers don't run the ball to the outside a ton, but when they do, he is a pretty good blocker. And that's something I know Xavier's a big dude and he can block as well. But Jonathan has that too.
Anyway, before we wrap up here, let's kind of get into Washington really quick. They are in the bottom third of the league in basically every defensive category. They are particularly poor against the run. They're allowing 5 yards per carry. They are giving up 137.7 yards per game. Passing defense, they're around the middling group. They're 19th overall. But offensively,
these guys are great.
They are balling. So they're scoring 29.7 points a game, which is up there at the top of the league. They're 5th in the league in yards per game, 378. They're in the top 5 in both yards per play and rushing yards per game. Like they're in the top 4 in passing yards per play. Like this is a good offense, and they're going to have to put up points. And luckily, they have a running back who can pick up chunks of yardage. They're just going to have to win a shootout here.
Yeah. This is a very difficult game for even the most optimistic Panthers dude to choose them. I mean, these guys are just too good on offense. With the defense, as we've hit home, with the defense that has trouble tackling, has trouble from a scheme perspective as well, who really struggle against the run. This one's going to be very difficult. I think the Commanders. I think the Commanders win this one. I don't think I need to do any extra research on this prior to giving out my prediction. Also, like, these Commanders might make a legitimate playoff run. I mean, what the heck? They stood tall against the Ravens last week. They're not in a great division. So, yeah, okay. Mike has told me that we need to wrap. So, we need to wrap. Mike, this was fun. Appreciate you catching.
I would say so.
Yeah, appreciate you catching me up, and a really good job to you, buddy. Thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach, who we did shout out this week. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. Finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all your Panthers needs. Stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap.